The study of global history often overlooks the exploration of the real lives of individuals from the eras we study. That's why we've decided to launch a segment called The Life of, where we will delve into an ordinary day in the lives of various people. Today, we will experience a day in the life of a Japanese samurai. Along the way, we'll debunk a couple of stereotypes, learn about their lives, and, of course, analyze the movie 47 Ronin starring Keanu Reeves. Introducing our samurai, Shinji. It's the year 1610 and Shinji is just an ordinary one among approximately 400,000 samurai in that era. He serves his daimyo, feudal lord, not far from Hiji Castle, located in the Hyogo prefecture. Shinji's task is as simple as can be. He guards the lord's castle, a role that in Europe would have earned him the title of a common guard. However, we're in Japan, and here, Shinji is a samurai, even though he belongs to the lowest caste. A little higher in the hierarchy is the daimyo, also a samurai but one who manages both the castle and the small surrounding town. The daimyo typically commands anywhere from 100 to a couple of thousand samurai, much like Shinji. In turn, the daimyo, along with hundreds of others like him, unquestionably obeys the shogun, the chief samurai and ruler of Japan. Currently, that role is held by the legendary Ieyasu Tokugawa, who put an end to feudal wars and consolidated all power in his hands. There were various intermediate classes like banner-bearers, vassals, bowmen, but we won't dwell on them in detail and will instead focus on a simplified scheme. Shinji wears light armor and wields a bow. Contrary to common misconception, not all samurai wore plate armor and carried two swords. That was the domain of swordsmen, but there were also regular and mounted archers, as well as foot soldiers. The samurai art of archery, known as kyujutsu, is still practiced in Japan today, and there are numerous competitions dedicated to it. It's worth noting that up until the 16th century, skill in archery was even more highly regarded than swordsmanship. However, as you might have guessed, Shinji also possesses the familiar katana, and in fact, he carries two swords since samurai, as a privileged class, were allowed to do so. Alongside the well-known katana, there was a small companion blade called the wakizashi, usually worn on the belt. Even when the Tokugawa shogunate prohibited the public carrying of weapons, samurai were still allowed to carry two swords wherever they pleased. As you may have gathered, real power was effectively concentrated in the hands of the samurai. If it seems to you that they were the dominant caste in Japan during that time, you are absolutely correct. Officially, Tokugawa divided the country into four classes: samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. However, the same decree also explicitly outlined the exceptional role of samurai, placing them above all others. The key aspect of this role was the so-called right to kill and go. Any samurai, from the shogun down to our guard Shinji, had the right to execute a member of another social class without trial for any perceived offense. People were killed for the slightest transgressions, even a sideways glance, and such incidents were so common that they didn't surprise ordinary workers. In the Russian language, there is actually an equivalent term to the word samurai, and that is dvoryanin, meaning nobleman or knight. In Russia, they also held absolute power over other social classes. However, the key difference lies in the fact that any Japanese person bearing the title of samurai was a true warrior. Whether it was a shogun or our Shinji, they all received the same upbringing. They were raised from childhood on legends of samurai, instilled with Buddhist indifference to death, and fostered with a genuine cult of bravery, courage, and unwavering loyalty to their lord. In the past, before samurai became a separate caste, they were essentially feudal lords. A prosperous landowner would manage thousands of peasants on his estate. However, this same lord would, at his lord's first call, don armor, forget about his own authority, and march into battle. This might remind you somewhat of medieval Europe with its vassals, doesn't it? Of course, commoners couldn't become samurai. To earn the title, it took more than just being born into the right family. It also required passing through rigorous trials. For instance, Shinji's father once ordered him to spend several nights in a cemetery to strengthen his spirit. He also regularly took his son to witness public executions and the nightly inspection of severed heads of criminals, and this was a mandatory part of the process. Young samurai had to leave their mark on these heads to prove that they had been there and completed their training. Shinji, like thousands of future samurai, endured hunger, was made to walk barefoot in the snow, and worked without sleep for days on end. It was believed that these experiences toughened the spirit and cultivated humility. But most importantly, what set all samurai apart was the unwavering adherence to bushido, the code, rules, and norms of Japanese warriors. People often compare it to the code of chivalry for knights, but that's a mistake. The knightly code was mostly unwritten, and its principles often contradicted each other. For example, attacking an opponent from behind was commonplace for samurai because victory was paramount. However, any knight would consider it an insult. Certainly, bushido was also violated, and the myth that any violator committed seppuku, ritual suicide, is far from true. If that were the case, samurai would have quickly disappeared as a class. Public acts of suicide were rare, and more often, a samurai simply lost respect. Our Shinji is a good guy and didn't violate bushido. Does that mean he is protected from the possibility of taking his own life? According to the code, Shinji's life belonged to his daimyo, a higher-ranking samurai. In the event that he was killed, and no command came from a higher-ranking samurai, all of daimyo's samurai would perform the ritualistic suicide known as junshi. However, these cases were rare. Daimyo typically died in battle, alongside their forces. So, in general, Shinji is protected from sudden departures from life. But how does he make a living? Here's the bad news. There's no point in calculating how much rice Shinji could buy with his salary, because Shinji was actually paid in rice. Despite the presence of gold and silver coins in Japan during that period, a significant portion of salaries, taxes, and other payments were made in rice. In some provinces, they accepted one type of money, in others, a different type. Therefore, rice served as a kind of currency, with the main measure called koku. It was understood that 1 koku was the amount of rice a person needed to survive for a year. 1 koku, for example, weighed 150 kilograms or 400 grams of rice per day. Not much, right? By the way, this measure is still in use in modern Japan. However, it has now been equated to 180 liters. But it's not all bad news. Our Shinji, as an ordinary warrior, Osigaru, received about 20-30 koku per year. His daimyo's income could reach up to 1 million koku per year, and more fortunate samurai, such as those in the daimyo's administration, received around 100 koku. Is this a lot or a little? Well, let's try to convert everything into money, which, as we've already mentioned, varied greatly, and samurai themselves chose what to use and how to deal with it. Let's take the most popular coin issued by the Takaoka clan, called aban. In 1600, 1 aban was roughly equivalent to 30-40 koku. So, roughly rounding, Shinji earned 1 aban per year. By the way, many of us are familiar with the aban. It's precisely a reference to it that's in the head of the Pokemon Meowth in the legendary anime. The real aban was of this shape, and Shinji has one of them. This is 10 koban or ryo, 2 smaller denominations of coins. Fortunately, a document with the prices of that era has survived, specifically in ryo. Remember that Shinji has 10 of them per year, or roughly 8-10 per month. Now, let's see what you could buy with 1 ryo. The list is impressive. It includes 750 trips to the bathhouse, 214 visits to the barber, 158 watermelons, 278 books, 30 nights at a hotel, or 43 liters of juice. 1 ryo could also buy 1,500 skewers of dango, 140 kilograms of miso, or 250 trips to the theater. Even if we were mistaken and Shinjo received half as much, it would still mean that he could afford 150 pairs of sandals per month. Overall, this makes sense, considering that our guy, even though he is in the lowest rank, is still a samurai. Samurai were required to train for a minimum of 4 hours a day and always be well-groomed, neat, and pleasant-smelling. Bushido implies that a samurai should be an example for everyone, so Shinji incurred decent expenses on his appearance. If everything is so great, where did those Ronin from the movie with Keanu Reeves come from? In fact, we've already mentioned this. Literally, Ronin means a samurai without a master. In other words, a person who contradicts the very essence of Bushido. People became Ronin for various reasons. Some killed their master, some went bankrupt and couldn't pay their master, and others chose to become free. While Bushido does not allow for such possibilities, in the real world, things rarely go as planned. As a result, the government even introduced a special right called the right to 7 departures and 8 returns, allowing free-spirited samurai to periodically leave their master and return. If our Shinji ever loses his lord, he will become a Ronin, and that's not a happy fate. Other samurai hate them, and in many cases, even envy them. Ronin were often persecuted, and stories were made up about them portraying them as cannibals. However, Most ronin became headhunters, mercenaries, or even merchants. Nothing prevented these guys from going into business, but in reality, most of them didn't abandon the samurai path. This is exactly what the film 47 Ronin is about, based on a real story. In the year 1701, Daimyo Oishi was sentenced to seppuku for attacking a samurai close to the shogun named Kira. As a result, 47 of Oishi's subordinates, who were samurais just like our Shinji, unexpectedly became ronin. The situation was unusual, and it would have been foolish to ask these guys to commit ritual suicide, so they gave up on that idea. Instead, the newly minted ronin, on the contrary, embraced bushido and decided to seek ritual and lawful revenge for their master. The ronin deceived Kira's vigilance by pretending to be drunk, getting married, and generally appearing to enjoy life as ronin. However, behind the scenes, they carefully planned their revenge, which they successfully executed in the year 1703. The shogun faced a complex situation. On one hand, the ronin killed his retainer, which warranted the death penalty. On the other hand, they adhered to the bushido code until the end and were beloved by the common people. In the end, the shogun allowed them to commit ritual suicide, sparing only the youngest among them. But the fate of most samurais was not as romantic. Feudal wars raged on. Unruly ronin attacked villages, and neighboring countries like China and Korea occasionally posed threats. Most often, samurais met their end in battle, which was considered an honor. However, the death rate wasn't as high because, as we've mentioned before, every samurai was an exceptional warrior, well prepared for all situations, and they continued to train regardless of their circumstances. Shinji's life wasn't easy, but compared to some historical eras, he lived quite well. Well, we will live great if you like the video and suggest other warriors for analysis in the comments. See you again, friends.